For generations, humanity had lived in peace among the stars. They were not the oldest race nor the most advanced, but they had something that made them different. They learned fast. From the moment humans joined the galactic concord, they had been seen as newcomers, young and curious, always asking questions, always trying to understand others. To most alien races, humanity was harmless. They traded fairly, built colonies in quiet corners of space, and preferred talking over fighting. They sent doctors, teachers, and engineers where others sent soldiers. It was their way of keeping peace. But peace has a strange price. It can make others think you are weak. That mistake was made by the Tavar Dominion. The Tavar were old, ancient even. Their empire stretched across dozens of star systems. They had once been respected, but in recent centuries they had become greedy and proud. When they looked at humans, they saw a young species that hadn't yet learned its place. To them, humanity's peaceful nature was not wisdom. It was softness. It all started with a mining system far out near the Perseus Arm, a small but rich collection of asteroid fields full of rare metals. The Tavar had claimed it belonged to them by ancestral right, even though their nearest colony was light years away. Humanity had legally settled the system and built a station there called Eden's Reach. Miners, scientists, and families lived there peacefully, sending minerals back to Earth and other colonies. But then came the message. The Tavar Dominion sent an official demand to the United Terran Council, the government that represented all human worlds. The message was cold and clear. Abandon the system, remove all human presence, or face consequences. When the message was shown in the council chamber, most delegates thought it was some kind of mistake. Humanity had been part of the Concord for nearly 100 years, and such open threats were rare. But the Tavar were serious. They followed their demand with a blockade. Several warships surrounded the mining station, cutting it off from supply routes. For the first time in decades, human diplomats found themselves staring at a wall of silence. The council sent response after response, asking for negotiations. They reminded the Tavar that humanity had no intention of taking their worlds or fighting. But every message was ignored. The Tavar believed they could scare humanity into leaving. They didn't think humans had the will to fight back. Inside the Concord, other races whispered among themselves. Some thought the Tavar were testing humanity's limits. Others said it was only a matter of time before war broke out. But no one stepped in to stop it. The galaxy had seen too many conflicts to care about one more. Meanwhile, on the colony of Eden's Reach, life turned uneasy. The miners noticed strange lights in the distance. Tavar ships scanning their asteroids. Civilian ships were being turned away. One morning, communications went dark. The Tavar had jammed every human frequency. Back on Earth, the council met in emergency session. It was the first time in living memory that humans had been openly threatened. After long hours of debate, the council decided to send one last message, a warning that would go down in history. The message was simple. Leave our space. We do not seek conflict, but if you bring war to us, you will not like what follows. The Tavar laughed at that. Across their empire, their leaders called humanity's warning a bluff from children. They had fought wars for centuries and believed themselves unbeatable. They had no idea that humanity had faced extinction before, and survived. While the Tavar prepared their fleets, something quiet began happening in human space. The evacuation of border colonies began under the name Operation Silent Sky. Families were moved away, but military cargo ships started moving in. Old stations that had been dormant for years flickered back to life. Deep within the Moon's defense network, the AI systems that had been offline since the Sol Wars began to hum again. Humanity didn't talk about revenge. They didn't make grand speeches. They simply prepared. In a hidden base orbiting Mars, the High Command met behind closed doors. The top admirals and scientists sat around a table lit only by holographic maps of Tavar space. The room was silent for a long time before one of them finally spoke. They think we're still explorers. They don't remember what we had to do to survive our own wars. Every person in that room understood what those words meant. Humanity had once nearly destroyed itself on Earth. The lessons learned during those times were burned deep into their history. The Tavar were about to learn that lesson firsthand. Even as the Conquered tried to calm tensions, human fleets were moving. Their ships were not the largest or the flashiest, but they were efficient, fast, and built with one purpose: survival. Out on Eden's Reach, the miners didn't know any of this. They just hoped the Tavar would leave them alone. But the Tavar didn't want peace. They wanted to send a message that no one could challenge their authority. So they attacked. The strike came without warning. Dozens of Tavar warships opened fire on the colony's defense grid. The human outposts had no chance. Within hours, the station was gone. Nothing left but debris and silence. Over 14 million people were lost. When the news reached Earth, the entire planet went still. There were no protests, no speeches, just quiet disbelief. For a long moment, it felt like the air itself had stopped moving. But that silence didn't last long. In cities across the world, factories changed their production lines overnight. Civilian ships were recalled and converted into troop carriers. Old shipyards that had been turned into museums reopened. Every human world began working as one, not out of hatred, but out of something stronger: unity. For the first time in centuries, humanity remembered what it was capable of when threatened. Back in the council chamber, the mood had changed. Gone was the soft diplomacy and polite discussion. The new tone was cold and focused. One of the senior counselors stood and said, "This isn't about territory anymore. This is about survival." They didn't want revenge. They wanted to make sure no one ever tried this again. Reports from the outer colonies showed Tavar fleets moving deeper into human territory. They were confident, almost careless. They didn't even bother to hide their movements. But what they didn't know was that every single one of their ships was being tracked. Human satellites, stealth drones, and hidden relays were already mapping every course, every transmission, every energy pulse. While the galaxy watched and doubted, humanity was already setting a trap. It was around this time that the conquered tried to intervene, sending mediators and diplomats. But humanity refused to talk. They crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed, the council replied. And that was the end of it. No one outside human space knew what was happening next. But strange things began to occur. Tavar scout ships started disappearing. Communication buoys went dark. Patrol fleets reported phantom signals, human warships that seemed to appear and vanish without trace. The Tavar commanders laughed it off at first. They thought it was technical malfunction or human desperation. They were wrong. Humanity had activated something far older and far more powerful than anyone had expected: the human defense grid. It was an interstellar network built during Earth's darkest era, when the fear of alien invasion had first driven humanity to build weapons capable of protecting an entire solar system. For decades, it had been dormant. Now it was alive again. From hidden stations buried in asteroid belts to automated weapons platforms around distant moons, the grid came online. Energy signatures began pulsing quietly through the dark, invisible to anyone who wasn't human. In the deep silence of space, Earth's old defense machines began to whisper to one another again. The galaxy still thought humans were weak. The Tavar still thought they were winning. But somewhere out there in the void between stars, humanity was waking up, and when humanity wakes up, history remembers. Because no matter how far they travel, no matter how peaceful they try to be, there's a simple truth that lies deep in the heart of every human being. They will not start the fight, but they will end it. And the Tavar were about to find out what that truly meant. The destruction of Eden's Reach spread across human space like a dark wave. At first, no one believed the news. It was too sudden, too impossible. The Tavar Dominion had wiped out an entire human colony, and there were no survivors. All communication channels filled with silence. Families tried to reach their loved ones, but every signal ended the same way: static and nothing more. Within hours, the entire United Terran Council went into emergency session. The atmosphere in the chamber was different this time: heavy, serious, and quiet. The loss wasn't just about territory anymore. It was about people, about families who had trusted their leaders to keep them safe. Across the galaxy, the other species of the conquered watched carefully. Most expected humanity to surrender or beg for peace. They thought the human spirit would break. But that didn't happen. Instead, something began to change on Earth. The streets were filled with calm faces, but underneath that calmness was a quiet fire. People didn't shout or protest. They didn't ask for revenge. They simply waited, trusting that their government would act. Every news channel repeated one question: What happens now? The answer came from the council chairperson himself. Standing before a global broadcast, he said only one sentence that was repeated 1,000,000 times over the next few days. We warned them once. This time our warning will echo forever. That was the last official statement from Earth for a long time. Behind the scenes, military preparations were moving faster than anyone could have imagined. Every shipyard in the solar system was activated. Civilian transports were recalled and modified for military use. Old planetary defense codes were reactivated. Hidden facilities deep under the polar regions began to hum with life again. But the most remarkable thing wasn't the weapons. It was the unity. Humanity, which had once been divided by borders and beliefs, now stood as one species under one purpose: to protect its people. In the outer colonies, people volunteered in record numbers. Engineers, pilots, and even scientists left their regular work to help in any way they could. The collective energy of billions of humans turned toward one direction: survival. While humanity prepared quietly, the Tavar Dominion continued its arrogance. Their broadcasts were filled with pride and mockery. They called humanity fragile, naive, and unfit for the stars. They believed Earth was already broken. Their fleets expanded deeper into human space, taking control of abandoned relay stations and cutting communication lines. What they didn't realize was that every move they made was being recorded. Every route, every signal, every formation. The humans were watching. Then, one night, and if night even existed in the deep of space, a single message was transmitted from Earth to the Tavar High Command. It was the second and final warning. The message was calm, almost gentle. There was no anger in the voice that spoke. It said, "You have attacked our people. You have destroyed our homes. You still have a chance to stop. Leave our space and never return. This is not a threat. This is your only warning." It was the kind of message that should have made the Tavar think, but arrogance blinds even the wisest. The Tavar leaders laughed in their war halls. They believed the humans were bluffing, desperate to sound strong after losing a colony. Their news networks broadcast the message across their empire, calling it a message of fear from a dying race. But while they laughed, humanity moved. From Mars to Titan, from the lunar shipyards to the orbital rings above Earth. Preparations reached their final stage. Silent fleets were already in position near the edges of human space. The human defense grid, a system that had not been used for nearly 200 years, was fully operational again. It wasn't just a line of defense. It was a web of hidden power. It connected satellites, stations, and long-forgotten outposts into one living network. Every piece of technology, every weapon, every sensor was linked. Nothing could enter human space without being seen. In the dark corners of the galaxy, a few Concord observers began to notice strange things. Entire human fleets disappeared from their scanners, and no one could explain how. It was as if humanity had simply vanished from the map, but deep in the shadows those same ships were hiding, waiting for the signal. The official Concord Council tried once again to bring peace. Their envoys sent requests to both sides, urging them to stop before things got out of control. Humanity did not respond. The Tavar did, by attacking another border station. That was the last straw. Inside a sealed chamber beneath Earth's surface, the council met for one final decision. There were no debates this time, no arguments. They all knew what had to be done. Humanity had tried peace. Humanity had sent warnings. Now there was only one choice left: to ensure that no one would ever threaten them again. After the vote, one of the council members looked out the window toward the stars and whispered quietly, "They wanted war. Let them have it." In the following days, the galaxy watched as strange signals began to pulse through human space. Old beacons lit up for the first time in centuries. Fleets that had been silent began to move in perfect coordination. Yet to the Tavar, nothing seemed different. They continued to push forward, capturing small outposts and boasting about their victories. Their news channels reported that the human resistance was collapsing. They had no idea that they were walking straight into a trap built years before they were even born. At the same time, ordinary people on Earth continued their lives with a kind of quiet determination. They worked, helped each other, and trusted that their leaders knew what they were doing. Even school children understood that something huge was coming. They could feel it in the air, in the way the adults talked in whispers, in the way the news went silent about the war. A few Concord observers dared to visit Earth during this period. What they found was not fear, it was focus. Every human seemed to carry a calm certainty, as if they already knew the outcome. One alien diplomat later wrote in his report, "I have seen species prepare for war before, but never like this." The humans were not angry. They were ready. Then came the day the skies changed. On every human world, bright lights appeared in orbit. Fleets of ships leaving one after another, heading into deep space. Families gathered outside their homes to watch the streaks of light in the sky. Some cheered. Some cried. Some just stood in silence, holding hands. Every ship carried the same insignia, the mark of the United Terran Defense Force. These weren't explorers anymore. They were protectors, born from loss but fueled by hope. Back on the Tavar homeworld, the Dominion's leaders received reports of massive human fleet movements. They dismissed them as panic maneuvers, thinking humans were preparing to flee. One of their commanders joked, "They're finally running." But what they didn't realize was that humanity had never run from anything. Not on Earth. Not in space, not ever. The next few weeks were filled with strange silence. The Tavar kept searching for human ships but found nothing. Communications with their forward fleet started dropping one by one. At first, they blamed interference. But deep down, some began to worry. Something didn't feel right. Rumors began to spread. Whispers of entire Tavar squadrons going missing. Patrols sent to investigate never came back. Then came the message that froze the Dominion's command centers. We are not alone in their space anymore. They are everywhere. No one understood what that meant, but humanity did. The trap was set. Every move, every fleet, every signal had been carefully predicted and countered. Humanity had spent months quietly preparing for this exact moment. The warning had been sent. The Tavar had ignored it. Now humanity would show what happens when their patience runs out. But even at that moment, Earth didn't celebrate. The people didn't cheer for war. They prayed for its end. They knew the cost of fighting. They had lived through enough of their own conflicts to understand what it meant to destroy. What made them different was that they didn't want destruction. They wanted peace through strength. They wanted to make sure no other world, no other race, would ever have to lose what they lost on Eden's reach. The silence before the storm stretched across the stars. The Tavar thought it was victory. The galaxy thought it was fear. But in truth, it was humanity's calm before action, the quiet breath before history changed forever. And in that silence, one truth began to spread like a whisper across every human ship, every command room, every distant colony. They wanted war. Now they'll see what war truly means. When the silence finally broke, it didn't begin with noise. It began with absence. Across the outer human colonies, the Tavar Dominion's fleets moved proudly through space. Their warships were massive and intimidating, decorated with the symbols of conquest. Every admiral believed victory was already theirs. The humans, they thought, were finished, scattered, unprepared, hopeless. But the Tavar didn't know that every step they took had been watched, every signal traced, every route predicted. Humanity had stayed quiet not out of fear but out of planning. They had waited for the perfect moment. It came one night when the Tavar's Fourth Fleet entered the Orion Expanse, a region filled with old mining fields and abandoned research stations. They thought they were chasing a retreating human convoy. Their scanners showed faint trails of engines as if a small group of ships had just passed through. Confident, they followed. What they didn't realize was that the engine trails were fake. They had been left there on purpose. Hidden in the shadows of broken asteroids, human ships waited in complete silence. Not a single light flickered. Their engines were cold. They were invisible to scanners. Then, at the exact moment when the Tavar fleet reached the center of the field, every human ship came to life, one by one like stars igniting in the dark. The Tavar didn't even have time to react. Within seconds, their communication channels filled with confusion. Every attempt to respond failed. Their radar screens went blank. It was as if space itself had turned against them. The humans didn't fight with noise or chaos. Their movements were calm, quiet, and precise. They had planned this for months. In less than an hour, the Tavar's proudest fleet was gone, not destroyed in anger, but erased in silence. Word of that night spread faster than light. When the Tavar High Command received the report, they refused to believe it. They sent scout ships to confirm what had happened. None returned. The once proud Dominion began to realize that something had shifted. Humanity was no longer the peaceful species they mocked. Back on Earth, no one celebrated. There were no public announcements, no broadcasts. People continued with their daily lives, calm and quiet, trusting that justice was being carried out far away in the stars. Inside the Terran Command Center, deep beneath the surface of Earth, the atmosphere was focused and serious. Holographic maps of the galaxy filled the room, red lines marking Tavar positions, blue dots showing human movements. Commanders spoke softly, issuing orders that echoed through encrypted channels across space. The human fleets weren't made of the biggest ships, but they were fast and smart. Each one carried artificial intelligence systems capable of making thousands of calculations per second. They could predict enemy movement before it happened. Humanity's secret weapon wasn't power, it was precision. As the days passed, more Tavar fleets vanished without explanation. In some sectors, their ships drifted silently, systems offline with no signs of life. In others, entire bases stopped responding. The Dominion's leaders grew desperate. They had been so sure of victory, and now they didn't even understand what was happening. For the first time in generations, the Tavar began to feel something unfamiliar: fear. The Galactic Conquered watched all this with shock. The same humans who were once known for art, music, and diplomacy had turned into something unstoppable. Yet they didn't act out of cruelty or hatred. Every move they made was measured, calculated, and quiet. One Conquered observer described it best. The humans fight like they are holding back the storm, not releasing it. They do only what is necessary. But what they call necessary is enough to change history. Meanwhile, on a small human colony near the border, people gathered in open fields every night to watch the stars. They couldn't see the war, but they could feel it. A strange heaviness in the air, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Parents told their children stories about bravery and unity, reminding them that this was not a war of conquest, but a fight for peace. Far away in the heart of the Tavar Dominion, their leaders gathered in secret meetings. The reports were terrifying. Fleets were missing. Colonies were silent. Their strongest outposts had vanished without distress calls. Their scientists couldn't even explain how human ships were moving so fast. They began to understand that humanity had evolved far beyond what anyone had imagined. For centuries, the galaxy had underestimated humans. They saw them as emotional, fragile beings driven by curiosity more than strength. But they forgot one thing. Humans learned from everything, especially from pain. Every loss made them sharper. Every tragedy made them stronger. The destruction of Eden's Reach had not broken humanity. It had awakened them. Then came the second wave. Human fleets moved deeper into Tavar space, targeting command centers, fuel depots, and communication hubs. Yet even then, they avoided civilian worlds. Humanity wasn't fighting to destroy a race. They were fighting to end the threat. The Tavar tried to respond. They gathered what was left of their fleets and prepared to strike back. But when they launched their attack, they found nothing. Their sensors showed empty space. The humans were already behind them. In less than a week, the Dominion lost nearly half its military strength. No one in the galaxy could understand how it was happening. Some said it was new technology. Others whispered that humanity had discovered something ancient and powerful. But the truth was simpler. Humanity had mastered coordination and unity in ways no one else could. Every ship, every soldier, every command post worked like a single heartbeat. Inside the Terran High Command, one officer summed it up perfectly. They wanted to test us. Now they're learning what happens when we stop holding back. Despite their victories, the human fleets did not act with arrogance. Every order carried the same instruction: end the threat, but protect life where you can. That difference, that sense of restraint, was what separated humanity from the very enemies they were fighting. As the Tavar Empire began to crumble, their broadcasts grew desperate. Messages begged for support from the Conquered, pleading for mediation. But the Conquered refused to interfere. They had watched humanity's warning and chosen to ignore it. Now they could only watch history unfold. Meanwhile, on Earth, the people stayed strong. Cities remained calm. News anchors spoke with steady voices, reminding everyone that peace was being restored, not by words, but by courage. Children drew pictures of stars and ships, not knowing the true scale of what their species was achieving. Farmers continued planting, workers kept building, and scientists kept improving technology that would protect future generations. Humanity didn't pause to celebrate. They looked ahead. Even as the Tivar fell apart, humanity's leaders reminded everyone of the same principle. We do not fight because we love war. We fight because peace deserves defenders. That sentence was repeated in every classroom, every speech, every broadcast. It became more than a saying. It became the heart of who they were. One by one, the Tivar strongholds collapsed. Their pride turned into silence. The same commanders who had once mocked humanity now sent messages asking for surrender. But by then it was too late. Humanity wasn't seeking revenge. They were ensuring safety. Across the stars, human fleets began withdrawing, leaving behind only warnings on the frequencies of conquered worlds. The message was short, the same one that had started it all. Leave our space. We wanted peace. You wanted war. Now you understand the difference? The galaxy fell silent. For the first time in centuries, the Tivar Dominion, the empire that once called itself invincible, was on its knees. And still, Earth remained quiet. No cheering, no gloating, no parades, only quiet reflection. People understood what had been lost, not just lives, but innocence. Humanity had shown its power, but it had also reminded itself of the responsibility that came with it. They had proved a truth older than any star. Humanity never starts the fire, but once it burns, no darkness can survive it. As the last of the Tivar fleets vanished into silence, one message spread across every corner of space. Do not mistake our kindness for weakness. And from that day onward, the galaxy remembered. Humanity didn't seek dominance, only respect. They didn't conquer worlds. They protected their own. But everyone, every empire, every ruler, every species, learned a lesson they would never forget. You can threaten humans, you can insult them, you can even strike them once. But if you make them rise, you'll never see the same galaxy again. Because when humanity fights, it's not out of anger. It's out of love. Love for peace, for family, for their right to exist freely. That's what made them unstoppable. That's what made them human. The galaxy had gone silent. Every species in the conquered had heard the stories. The Tivar fleets vanishing, the sudden human precision, the impossible speed of their retaliation. No one wanted to believe it, but the proof was there. The once mighty dominion was collapsing. Yet even after all they had lost, the Tivar still refused to surrender. Pride can be more dangerous than any weapon. Their leaders convinced themselves that humanity had reached its limit, that the humans had used everything they had left. They can't keep this up forever, they told each other. They're just one small race. We'll rebuild and crush them. They didn't realize that humanity hadn't even begun to fight at full strength. Far from any known star, in the cold darkness beyond the edge of mapped space, something enormous waited, silent, unseen, and ready. It was humanity's last resort, a secret built in shadows long before the war began. Only a handful of people even knew it existed. It was called Nemesis. The Nemesis was more than a ship. It was a symbol of everything humanity had learned, from their first fire to their first flight among the stars. Built deep beneath the icy crust of Europa, it had taken decades to complete. It was a dreadnought like no other, miles long, built from layered alloys that could absorb radiation and distort sensors. Every inch of it had a purpose. But what made it truly terrifying wasn't its size or its weapons. It was its silence. The ship didn't roar to life. It whispered. Its engines made no visible glow. It could pass right through a system and leave no trace except the faint hum of static. For years it had been hidden, waiting for the day when peace would fail. That day had come. The order was simple. The Council sent a coded transmission, just one word, unleash, and with that the Nemesis woke up. Its AI core came online, reading decades of data in seconds. Across its decks, lights flickered, engines powered up, and weapons systems checked themselves with flawless precision. From the outside, the ship looked like a ghost rising from darkness. Inside, the crew stood in silent awe. They knew what this ship meant. Not revenge, not conquest, but finality. Nemesis was the answer to every threat that thought humanity would kneel. Meanwhile, in the Tavar command halls, leaders argued over their next move. They had already lost half their fleets. Their supply routes were cut, yet their pride wouldn't let them admit defeat. They ordered every remaining ship to gather in one massive armada, a final attempt to strike back. The Dominion's fleet became the largest ever assembled in their history, thousands of ships moving toward human space in a desperate push. They planned to overwhelm the human defenses through sheer numbers. But as they moved, human scouts watched from afar. Hidden sensors across light years recorded every movement. By the time the Tavar armada reached the edge of Terran space, the trap was already set. At first, the Tavar saw nothing. Empty stars, silent radio channels, and no human ships in sight. It felt too easy. Then space itself began to bend. The Nemesis dropped out of slipspace. Not slowly, not quietly, but like a storm tearing through the night. Its sheer size darkened the stars. The Tavar ships froze in confusion. They had never seen anything like it. Before they could react, the Nemesis transmitted a single message, translated into the Tavar language. You were warned. What followed was not chaos. It was control. The ship's main weapons weren't fire or destruction. They were precision tools, designed to disable fleets before they even fired. Energy pulses spread through the Tavar ranks, shutting down engines, erasing systems, and freezing weapons in place. Their ships went dark one after another, like candles being blown out. From orbit, it must have looked like an eclipse swallowing 1,000 stars. But humanity didn't destroy everything. They left ships adrift, powerless but alive. The message was clear. This is what happens when you bring war to those who seek peace. Across the galaxy, the Conquered watched in disbelief. Reports came in from every corner. The Tavar armada was gone. Not defeated in the usual sense, but erased so completely that some believed it was a myth. For humanity, it was not a victory to celebrate. It was a warning fulfilled. Inside the command center of the Nemesis, the crew monitored every signal. The captain, calm and collected, gave one final order. No pursuit. We've said enough. And just like that, the Nemesis vanished back into slipspace, leaving behind silence. In the following weeks, Tavar colonies across the galaxy surrendered without resistance. Entire planets broadcast messages of peace, begging for mercy. Humanity didn't send soldiers. They sent mediators and aid ships. The same people who had unleashed the galaxy's most powerful weapon were now helping rebuild what was left. That's what made them different. Even after all the pain, they still believed in mercy. They didn't occupy the Tavar worlds, didn't demand tribute or land. They simply said, never again. The Concord held an emergency session to discuss what had happened. Representatives from dozens of species argued, debated, and speculated. Some called the Nemesis a monster. Others called it a miracle. But every one of them agreed on one thing. Humanity had become something the galaxy could no longer ignore. One historian from the Concord wrote later, they came into the stars as children of curiosity. They became warriors only when forced. And when they fought like those who remembered every tear, every loss, every promise broken. On Earth, the war felt distant, like a shadow finally fading. Cities returned to their rhythm. Families reunited. Factories went back to building ships meant for exploration instead of defense. Children learned in schools about the Nemesis not as a weapon, but as a lesson, that strength without compassion is destruction, but compassion without strength is extinction. Across the colonies, people planted trees in memory of those lost on Eden's Reach. Monuments were simple, just a stone with the words, "Peace is worth protecting." But not everyone in the galaxy saw it that way. In secret, other empires began to study humanity's rise. Some feared them, others admired them, but none dared to provoke them again. The message had been written not in blood but in silence. A silence that carried more weight than any war ever could. Months after the Nemesis' final mission, the ship itself disappeared. Officially, it was said to have been decommissioned and hidden again, somewhere beyond human space. No one knew where. Some said it drifted quietly through the void, powered down but still watching. Others believed it had been buried beneath the surface of an unmarked moon, waiting for the day humanity might need it again. Either way, the world moved forward. The humans returned to their true nature, builders, dreamers, explorers. But now they carried with them something new: respect. The galaxy treated them differently. Every trade deal, every treaty, every conversation began with caution. No one wanted to repeat the Tavar's mistake. The war had changed humanity, but not in the way the Tavar expected. It didn't turn them cruel or power-hungry. It reminded them of balance, that kindness is only real when it can defend itself. In one of the Council's closing sessions after the war, a leader summed it up in simple words: "We do not want to be feared. We only want to be remembered as those who gave peace its final shield." And so humanity became the quiet guardian of the galaxy. Not rulers, not conquerors, but protectors. They rebuilt the conquered's trust, strengthened alliances, and made sure that no other world would ever face the same tragedy they had endured. The Nemesis became a legend. Some said it was the most powerful creation in human history. Others said it was just a reflection of who humans really were: strong, compassionate, and unbreakable when cornered. As years passed, stories of that war turned into myths told around fires on distant worlds. Aliens whispered about the night the stars went dark, when a silent human ship crossed the sky and ended an empire without hatred. And on Earth, under the same sky where it all began, humanity looked up at the stars once more. Not with anger, not with pride, but with quiet wonder. Because deep down, they never wanted war. They only wanted peace that would last. They had given the galaxy a warning and kept their promise. Months had passed since the war ended, but the silence it left behind was louder than any explosion. The stars that once flickered with constant battles now seemed calm, peaceful, almost shy, as if the galaxy itself was still recovering from what it had seen. The Tavar Dominion, once the most feared empire in space, was now nothing more than a memory of arrogance and ashes. Their cities were quiet, their fleets gone, their pride shattered. Those who had once looked down on humanity now looked at them with a strange mix of fear and respect. But for the humans, victory didn't feel like celebration. It felt like responsibility. On Earth, people were trying to move on. Children went back to schools, streets were full again, and the skies were once more filled with peaceful ships traveling between the colonies. Yet even in the peace, a strange heaviness hung in the air, the kind that comes after surviving something too big to forget. At the Earth Council, world leaders gathered almost every day, discussing how to rebuild, how to guide the galaxy forward without repeating the mistakes of the past. Everyone knew they had power now, more than they had ever imagined. But no one wanted to use it the wrong way. One of the senior counselors once said, "If we let this victory change who we are, then we'll be no different from those who attacked us." That sentence spread across human space. It became something like a quiet promise that humanity would never become the monster it had defeated. Meanwhile, across the ruins of the Tavar worlds, something unexpected was happening. Human ships had arrived, not soldiers, not conquerors, but builders and doctors. They brought food, medicine, and engineers. The Tavar had expected revenge, but instead they were met with compassion. At first, the Tavar people didn't believe it. They thought it was a trick. They waited for punishment, for humiliation. But days turned into weeks and no punishment came. Instead, they saw humans rebuilding their broken power grids, repairing hospitals and giving food to starving families. A Tavar elder once asked a human officer, "Why are you helping us after what we did to you?" The officer smiled softly and replied, "Because someone has to stop the hate. It has to end somewhere." That answer spread among the Tavar colonies like light through the dark. Many of them began to realize something they had never understood before. Strength wasn't in destroying others, it was in choosing not to. The galaxy watched closely. Every species, every government, every leader was taking notes. Humanity had proven it could fight harder than anyone else, but now it was proving something even greater. It could forgive. Still, peace never comes easy. There were some humans who struggled to let go of the anger. People who had lost families, homes, and entire worlds found it hard to understand why their leaders were helping those who caused so much pain. Some said, "They deserve what happened to them. Why should we rebuild their cities?" But the answer always came from those who had seen the war up close. Veterans, scientists, and survivors would remind them, "If we destroy them completely, We destroy the part of ourselves that believes in better. And that belief, that fragile, powerful belief, was what held humanity together. Far away, in the remains of the Tavar capital, a meeting was arranged. It was the first time in history that humans and Tavar leaders would sit in the same room, without weapons between them. The Tavar delegates walked in slowly, their eyes filled with guilt and fear. They expected anger. They expected to be reminded of their failures, but instead the human envoy greeted them calmly, offering a simple handshake. No speeches, no arrogance, just quiet dignity. The human representative began the meeting with words that would echo across generations. We don't rebuild your worlds because you deserve it. We rebuild them because we must prove that mercy is stronger than hate. That was the beginning of something new. A fragile peace built not on power, but on understanding. Over time, joint projects started between humans and Tavar. Scientists from both sides worked together to clear radiation zones, replant forests, and rebuild transport systems. It wasn't easy. There were moments of mistrust, arguments, even sabotage. But each time they chose to start again, and slowly, brick by brick, life returned. Children born after the war didn't know the hate their parents carried. They played together in rebuilt cities, learned each other's languages, and studied stories about how close the galaxy had come to destroying itself. Teachers told them that this was the price of pride, and that peace wasn't something given. It was something protected every single day. But while the world healed, far from the colonies, rumors began to spread again. Some claimed that a few Tavar generals had survived and were hiding on distant moons, plotting revenge. Others said the Nemesis, the ship that ended the war, was still watching them, keeping silent guard from the edge of known space. No one could confirm it. The ship had disappeared months ago. Some said it had been dismantled, others believed it had simply gone into hibernation. But the stories never stopped. People whispered that Nemesis wasn't just a ship. It was a symbol, a reminder that humanity's patience should never be mistaken for weakness. In the great archives of the conquered, historians began writing about the war in a different way. They didn't call it the Human Tavar War anymore. They called it the Reckoning. Not because of the destruction, but because it forced everyone, human and alien alike, to face who they really were. One conquered historian wrote, "The war was not humanity's victory over another species. It was humanity's victory over its own rage." And he was right. Years later, during the anniversary of peace, people gathered across Earth in the colonies to remember the lives lost, both human and Tavar. It was a quiet ceremony. There were no speeches of pride, no songs of war. Only silence, candles, and faces that understood what it meant to survive. An old woman, who had lost her husband on Eden's Reach, stood in front of the memorial and whispered to a young reporter, "We didn't win a war. We survived one, and that's enough." Her words went viral across the networks. They became part of every speech, every lesson, every reminder of what it meant to be human. In the Tavar capital, the same kind of memorial stood, but this one was different. At its base were words written in two languages. They came not to destroy, but to end the destruction. And below that, a small metal plate bore the image of two hands, one human, one Tavar, clasped together. Years of mistrust slowly gave way to fragile friendship. Human engineers helped the Tavar rebuild their atmosphere processors. Tavar architects helped humans design better habitats for distant worlds. The two races that had once tried to destroy each other were now building a shared future. Still, deep inside, every human knew one truth. Peace had a price, and it had been paid in full. In the quiet hours of the night, when the stars were bright and the world felt safe again, some still looked up and whispered a quiet thank you to the unseen guardians, to the soldiers who never came home, to the engineers who built the Nemesis, and to the leaders who chose compassion over revenge. Because in the end, it wasn't the power of the Nemesis that changed the galaxy. It was the power of restraint, the choice to stop when they could have gone further, the decision to forgive when they had every reason not to. And that choice, more than any weapon, reshaped the future. For generations, the story of the war was told not as a tale of victory, but as a lesson that no matter how powerful a species becomes, what defines it isn't its strength, but its mercy. And whenever new civilizations rose in the galaxy, whenever pride began to grow in their hearts, They were reminded of the story of humanity, the ones who were provoked into war, who fought like no other, and who ended it not with domination, but with compassion. They wanted war. Humanity gave them total eradication, not of their people but of their hatred, and in doing so, they gave the galaxy something it had almost forgotten: hope. Years had passed since the Great War ended. The scars of battle had faded from the stars, and the galaxy had slowly learned to breathe again. Yet even as peace spread across the systems, stories of that time were told everywhere, in schools and homes, in quiet corners of forgotten worlds. People spoke about it not as a tragedy, but as a turning point in history. Children who had never seen war listened with wide eyes when their parents told them how close everything had come to ending. They heard about the Tavar Dominion and its fall, about the human courage that refused to bend, and about the ship that changed everything, Nemesis. But the stories were no longer about fear. They were about understanding. In the new age that followed, the galaxy entered a time of rebuilding unlike anything before. Humans and Tavar worked together to form a new council, a united voice that included every race, no matter how small. This time it wasn't built on fear or power. It was built on trust. They called it the Concord of Life. At its first gathering, held in a massive hall orbiting a neutral world, thousands of representatives stood together. The air was filled with hope, yet underneath it a quiet tension lingered. Everyone remembered the war, and no one wanted to repeat it. The human ambassador stepped forward, dressed in simple gray. He didn't speak about victory or strength. He simply said, "We are here not to rule, but to remember." That one line echoed through the chamber. It became the foundation of the new alliance, a reminder that peace wasn't something permanent. It had to be cared for, guarded, and earned every day. Back on Earth, life was simpler again. Cities were rebuilt with cleaner energy. New schools were opened, and people started looking toward the stars not with fear but with curiosity. Humanity had grown wiser. They had learned that technology meant nothing without compassion. But even as peace flourished, there was one question that never stopped being asked. What happened to the Nemesis? It had vanished without a trace after the war. Some believed it was dismantled, its weapons destroyed to ensure no one could ever misuse them. Others whispered that it was still out there, hidden somewhere in the farthest corner of the galaxy, watching silently. There were stories of miners who picked up strange readings from uncharted space, of explorers who swore they saw the silhouette of a ship so large it blocked the stars for a moment, then disappeared. But no one ever found proof. The truth was known only to a few. The Nemesis had been hidden deliberately. After its final mission, the crew followed secret orders to take the ship beyond the mapped regions of space, into the cold black where no signals reached. There, in the heart of silence, they shut it down completely. Before powering off the main systems, the captain recorded one last message. It was simple, almost like a prayer. If peace ever fails, and if humanity forgets what mercy means, then wake us again. Until then, let us rest. And with that, the ship's lights went dark. Its engines cooled, and the mighty Nemesis became nothing more than a silent monument drifting among the stars. A sleeping guardian waiting for a world that might need it again. Generations passed. The galaxy changed. Old wounds healed, new colonies were born, and new friendships formed between species that had once been enemies. Trade routes opened, knowledge spread, and humanity became known not just as warriors or survivors, but as teachers, the ones who had learned from the hardest lessons and chose to share them. Every year, on the anniversary of the end of the war, people across the Concord lit a single white light. It wasn't for celebration. It was a reminder of loss, of mercy, and of the choice that had saved them all. In the Tavar capital, a young historian named Rehan spent his life studying those days. He was fascinated not just by the war itself, but by what came after it, how two civilizations that once hated each other learned to forgive. He often said, history didn't end with the Nemesis. It began there. Rehan traveled to Earth to study the original records of the Human Council. When he walked through the Hall of Memory, he was struck by how humble everything was. There were no statues of heroes, no trophies of victory. Just photographs, letters, and small personal items. A child's drawing from the Eden's Reach colony. A cracked helmet found on the ruins of a ship. a faded patch with a single word stitched on it: home. He realized something then. Humanity had never fought for domination. They had fought for home, for peace, for the right to exist without fear. And that was what made them different. One night, while standing under Earth's sky, Rayhan looked up at the stars that shimmered like diamonds and whispered, "They didn't destroy us. They saved us from ourselves." Meanwhile, on a distant mining outpost near the edge of known space, an old monitoring satellite picked up something unusual. A faint energy pulse, rhythmic, deliberate. It lasted only a few seconds before fading again. The technicians dismissed it at first, thinking it was interference. But one of them, curious and young, saved the data and ran it through old frequency archives. The pattern matched something ancient, something classified under Project Nemesis. When the data reached the council weeks later, no one panicked. They simply smiled. The message had been simple: still watching. Some believed it was an automatic signal triggered by random cosmic radiation. Others believed it was the ship itself, alive in its silence, keeping its promise to guard the galaxy. But whether it was real or not didn't matter anymore. The idea of Nemesis had become bigger than the ship itself. It was a symbol now, of the balance between power and mercy, of what humanity stood for when pushed to the edge. In the years that followed, new generations began exploring deeper into space. They carried with them lessons written not in books but in their hearts. They learned that every act of kindness, no matter how small, was stronger than any weapon. And that peace, like a flame, could light even the darkest void if someone protected it. On one quiet night, in a small settlement on Mars, a teacher told her students a story before they went home. She said, "Long ago there was a time when humans almost lost themselves in war. But they remembered who they were. They chose compassion over revenge. And because of that, you're here today, free, safe, and looking at the stars." A little girl raised her hand and asked, "Teacher, will there ever be another Nemesis?" The teacher smiled softly and replied, "No, child. We don't need another ship like that. Because Nemesis wasn't built from metal. It was built from courage, love, and the promise to protect what matters most. And that lives inside all of us." Outside the classroom, the night sky stretched endless and beautiful, filled with countless stars. Somewhere out there, maybe beyond the reach of any telescope, a massive silent ship drifted, wrapped in starlight, still waiting, still watching, still guarding. But humanity didn't look to it for protection anymore. They had become their own guardians, wiser, kinder and stronger, not because of their weapons, but because of their hearts. And so the story of humanity's war, the story of how they faced annihilation and gave back mercy, became the greatest tale ever told. A story of what it truly means to be human. They wanted war. Humanity gave them total eradication, not of their bodies, but of their hate, their arrogance, their belief that mercy was weakness. Humanity proved that the greatest power in the universe wasn't destruction. It was compassion that refused to die. The galaxy remembered. And as centuries passed, when new civilizations rose and fell, when new conflicts threatened to begin, leaders would whisper a single warning passed down through generations: do not awaken the ones who ended war, not because they feared humanity's weapons, but because they respected humanity's heart. And somewhere, far beyond sight, in the endless silence between stars, the Nemesis drifted on, the last guardian of peace, waiting patiently for a galaxy that might one day forget. But until that day came, it slept, dreaming not of war but of a universe finally free from it.